Hello, it's me, Laurel Ann, here today to talk about the books I read in October. October was kind of a challenging month for me. I really just didn't have it in me to read at all. I just felt like I was spinning my wheels the whole month. It was an emotionally fraught period of time. I had a lot of anxiety about the election. Obviously that's past now. We're on the up and up. Anyway, all that is to say that I am absolutely amazed that I managed to read 5 books because it really felt like I read 0 books. I also think that kind of slumpy feeling had an impact on my enjoyment of these books. So just wanted to get that out in front of this video. I've also had an unbelievable amount of angst about recording this video. I don't know why. I thought about getting drunk while recording it, but it's just too early in the day. I can't do that to myself. Okay, so the first book I read was Real Life by Brandon Taylor. This is about Wallace, a gay black man who is working on his PhD at a big state school in the Midwest. He's the only black man in his whole program. This is kind of a small story. It takes place all over the course of 1 or maybe 2 weeks. It focuses mainly on Wallace's relationship with his friends and professors and lab mates, and how his race and sexuality plays into those relationships. And it focuses particularly on a new sort of sexual romantic relationship that is blossoming in his life. This was shortlisted for the Booker. I thought it might win. It didn't, but it was well deserving of that place on that prize list. It covers a lot of ground thematically. It tackles racism in academia in a really sharp and effective way, which I think is a very important conversation to have, especially since so many people have this idea of academia and universities as, a liberal bubble and a place where racism and discrimination can't exist because everyone's so worried about being politically correct. And I think if you've ever had a conversation with a person of color at university, you probably know that is not the case at all. It also examines this really interesting idea of what is and what isn't real life, and how we can use that false dichotomy to discredit our own experiences. I will say, as much as I think this was excellent and I enjoyed it on a critical level, this also was very difficult to read. Wallace has pretty intense sexual and physical abuse in his past, and his feelings about that come up in the book. He really looks back on that time and kind of starts to examine it, seems like for the first time in his life. And that, it's of course a difficult thing to read, and the way it's written in this book is so visceral that, I don't say this as points against the book. It's fantastically done, but it's not, you're not entering a fun stroll through the park. This is a campus novel unlike any I've ever read before, and I think it's a really good and important direction to take that subgenre, if you can even call it that. Did I finish that sentence? Overall, this is just another really good and important book to come out of 2020, and I think if you're thinking about reading it, you should go for it. Scared me. Alrighty, Rue, the next book I want to talk about is The Bass Rock by Evie Wyld. This book centers on 3 women in different time periods. We have a young teenager in the late 1500s who has been accused of witchcraft. We have a woman in the 1950s who is struggling to kind of adjust to her new role as a second wife to a widower and the stepmother to his 2 sons, and a woman in present day who has been hired by her family to kind of clean out and house sit her grandmother's house as they prepare it for sale. And all 3 of these women are linked with elements of magical realism, as well as the sense of place of North Berwick in Scotland, as well as this Bass Rock just offshore. This is about women's mental health, as well as the way society demonizes and victimizes women and the often blurred line between those two things. Basically, on paper, this book is my perfect match. Like, literally, when I joined Storygraph and you had to type in all of those things that you like in books, witchcraft, Scotland, women, multi-generational family sagas, all of these things are present in this book. So I should have loved it very much. This should have been my favorite book of the year. Unfortunately, I don't know, I just didn't get into it as much as I thought. I do think part of it is just because of when I read it. Like I said, October was a difficult reading month for me, and my reading of this book was so protracted, I just wasn't really able to give it the attention that it deserves. And as a result, I kept getting confused. I still would really like to reread this book at some future time when I'm like not in a funk, and then it'll probably click with me a little bit more. So, you know, kind of giving like a reluctant mediocre review to this one, with the caveat that it's probably just my broken brain in autumn of 2020. Now for something completely different, The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. Are you surprised? I'm surprised. This is about a woman from London who accepts a job as a nanny for this rich family in the Scottish Highlands around the Cairngorms. This house is a Victorian house that they've updated, renovated, and made into a smart house. They have all the latest tech. And pretty much as soon as she gets there, things are a little bit off. The husband of the family is kind of a creep. The kids suck. And most of all, the technology in the house is acting up, being spooky, and so of course there's this whole question that hangs over the events of the story of whether or not there's something supernatural going on. If you've been here for a while, you may remember that I read Ruth Ware's In a Dark, Dark Wood last year, and I didn't really get on with her writing, but you know, that was her first book. This is her most recent book, with the exception of her real most recent book, but you know what I mean. It's a newer one, newer release. And so I figured, look, she's written all these books since then. She's probably leveled up as a writer. And I gotta say, all of the issues I had before were still present. There's just something about her writing that irritates me. And for the first like half of this book, I think most of the time I was reading it, I was just trying to figure out what it is. The main thing I think is just that the emotional pacing is a little bit off. Like in both books, very early on, the protagonists have very intense emotional reactions to things that aren't really serious. Like in this one, when she goes to the house for an interview, she talks about when she walked from like the old Victorian part of the house to the like modern contemporary architecture part of the house. She's just like so freaked out by that. She's like, I felt unbalanced. And then she eats dinner off of like a china plate, and she's like, oh my god, it was so wild to be in this modern glass room and eating off of a plate. And I was like, girl, it's a plate. So if you're starting up here with your characters' feelings, emotions, there's not really much room to escalate from there. And I question that decision. All that being said, I really liked The Turn of the Key. I thought it was fun. Did I get creeped out? Hard to say. But I don't know. Like it was a pretty solid thriller. Definitely better crafted than In a Dark, Dark Wood. And yeah, it was like wacky. It was fun. I will say the ending had me kind of like, okay, I have questions. But like, who cares? Am I done with Ruth Ware forever? Probably not. I'm going to continue to read them. I'm going to continue to be annoyed by them. But I'm going to continue to come away with them thinking, you know what, I had some fun. Oh, so then the next book was The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. This is a contemporary horror novel about a little family, 2 dads and their adopted daughter, who have rented a remote cabin by a lake for a little holiday. And one day a group of, I think it's 4 people with like weird homemade weapons show up, and they break into the house essentially and tell them that they have all received signs that the whole world will end if the family does not sacrifice a member of their family. So, you know, it's a relatively strong premise, but for me, I think the pacing of this book was totally off. It was just too damn long. What I just told you, that setup, took probably 150 pages. So for 150 pages, it's just like, okay, it's just the premise. You're just setting the stage. That's too long. That's too long, man. And then the rest of the book is basically just like these people are all tied up and they're watching Steven Universe on the TV and sometimes the news on the TV. They're arguing back and forth. They say, you're crazy, and they're like, we're not. And I did not get on with it. There was one scene of violence that was very intense and visceral that I thought was well done. That was definitely the peak of the book, and that was probably, I don't know, like a third of the way in, if that. And then the rest of it was just kind of this like bland back and forth. I mean, it's a little bit unfair of me really to say that I read this book, because at one point I skipped 100 pages, and guess what? I wasn't confused at all. I skipped 100 pages and jumped back in. I didn't feel like I'd missed anything. So that just, I think that that's a bad sign. If you can skip 100 pages of your narrative and everything still makes sense, maybe you should have cut out those 100 pages. Just a thought. I will say that I think that maybe the issue, once again, is me. I have not read very much, like, contemporary new horror. But what I have read, I just haven't really got on with. And it's frustrating to me because I really want to like it, but just like so far, I haven't liked it. And it's weird to me because I love horror movies. They're like my favorite thing to watch. But I think maybe what it is just that like a novel is too long. Living inside a horrific universe for as long as it takes to read a book is just not great for my emotional state, maybe. Throughout this book, I didn't feel scared. I just felt bad. And that didn't make me want to read it more, because I just kept thinking, okay, I gotta pick up that book that's gonna bum me out. Obviously, not all horror books are the same. I'm still dipping my toes in here and there and trying to find what works for me. So yeah, sorry. I wanted to like this book, it just didn't really pan out for me. I feel like my reviews of these books are truly deranged. And the last book I finished in October was Say Nothing, a true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland by Patrick Radden Keefe. Why do nonfiction books always have such long subtitles? I can never remember them. They're such a mouthful. Let's cancel long subtitles in 2021. This is a narrative nonfiction book about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and here we're focusing primarily on the Provos, which were like a subgroup of the IRA, and what they did over the decades of the conflict and the British Army and British government's response to them. And it's all kind of tied together around the disappearance and murder of Jean McConville, who was a widowed mother of 10. I gotta tell you guys, Patrick Radden Keefe is a hell of a reporter. He really knows how to spin a yarn. I listened to his podcast called Winds of Change this summer, and that was equally compelling. So when I found out that he had written this book, I knew that it was going to be up my street, and I was totally right. The main word I want to use to describe this book is just satisfying. I've just never read a nonfiction book that's not a memoir that just had so much momentum and thrust. He brings together decades of disparate actions and violence and events and brings them together into a really coherent and compelling narrative. I think this will appeal to fans of history and true crime and making fun of Margaret Thatcher. I was so impressed by this. It made me feel smarter, but it also made me feel entertained. I don't know why this book spoke to me as much as it did, but I just really loved it. I think it's amazing nonfiction. Please read it. That's all. Alright, so those were the books. Sorry for me. If you liked this video and you want to engage with it to help me and my channel out, but you don't have anything to say, you can just pop the dead leaves emoji into the comments. I'll know you watched this. As always, my social media links will be in the box below. You can follow me there. That is where I primarily talk to people and make friends. So if you want to be my friend, I'm down with that. Why does it never get any easier to end a video, no matter how many of them I make? Okay, bye! I'm having a breakdown, sort of subgenre? Hey, this channel is all about me. Horror. Ugh. Get your shit together, girl. What is wrong with my brain right now? I don't understand.